Good evening, everyone. We're going to call a meeting to order, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that the ground on which we live is the traditional territory of Caldwell First Nation, of the Three Fires Confederacy, and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island and who have embraced this stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all original people across Turtle Island. We will now have a moment of silent reflection, followed by the playing of our national anthem. Please stand for the national anthem. Okay, if we can get an adoption of the agenda for the January 9th, 2024 regular council meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Desjardins, support by Councillor Burns. All in favor? That carries. Any disclosures of community interest? Councillor Carrick?
Yes, I'd like to disclose an interest on bylaw 8551. Parent owns property at 6380 Malden Road and is within the Malden Road redevelopment and the EA. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Deputy Mayor?
Just again, Your Worship, as I'm about to be sworn under the Police Services Act, any discussions that relate to police service, police budgets, or discussions of that, I will always make sure that it's noted.
Thank you. And any others? Okay. And if we can get adoption of the minutes for the special meeting of council held November 6th, 2023, and the regular and closed meetings of council held December 12th, 2023 be adopted as presented. Councillor Riccio Spagnolo, support by Councillor Jarley, all in favor, and that carries as well. Mayor's comments, there aren't very many tonight. Welcome to our first meeting of 2024. And just to start off this meeting, I just want to really thank the town, staff, administration for all the hard work they did during the holidays and our Holiday Heritage Nights display that we had. It did end this weekend, but the community comments came all through the month, how beautiful it was, how great the activities were that were planned, and I think our residents really appreciated having something like that in the community to walk to and to enjoy. So thank you to everyone, and hopefully everyone had a safe and happy holiday season. And with that, we will continue on with the meeting. We don't have any public meetings or hearings, presentations, or delegations, so we'll move right into H, staff reports and correspondence for council's action. Starting with item 1, which is the parks plan, the parkland dedication and payment in lieu of parkland analysis. And joining us through Zoom, we have our Director of Planning and Development, Gudrun Baggs. Oh, there she is.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Happy New Year to everybody. So this report introduces the concept of a parkland dedication bylaw. As council is aware, the dedication of parkland is a requirement under the Planning Act. that essentially allows municipalities, ensures that as municipalities, as they grow, the park system grows with the municipality. So the Planning Act authorizes the town to prepare and adopt a parkland dedication bylaw to impose conditions on development to receive parkland or payment in lieu of parkland. And so the official plan and any secondary plan, as well as the parks master plan, are all policy documents that would outline park locations and designations and establish a comprehensive and planned park system for the community. But parkland dedication bylaw is the tool So administration has been working with Watson and Associates for some time on the development of a parkland dedication bylaw. But when the province passed Bill 23 a while back, a number of the requirements associated with parkland dedication under the Planning Act changed. So it took us a bit to understand sort of some of those implications associated with Bill 23. Noted that prior to the passage of a parkland dedication bylaw, a parks plan and corresponding analysis was required to understand the community's needs for parkland. So we've been working with Watson, and Mr. Abbs is here this evening to walk us through the required parks plan analysis, which can be used as the supportive framework for a future parkland dedication bylaw for consideration by council at a future meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Abbs on the parks plan and analysis, and we'll both be available following the presentation for council questions.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Just, hit the button there. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you to members of council, and thank you, Gudrun, for that introduction. So I have prepared a presentation that I'm going to go through. Please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. If you prefer to ask me questions throughout, I'm okay with that. If you'd rather wait and ask questions at the end, I'm okay with that too. So a little agenda for the presentation, for the discussion. I'll talk a little bit about the legislative overview, the authority under the Planning Act that allows you to impose parkland dedication. I'll talk a little bit about different parkland policies, talk about your current policy and your current practice, and talk about our analysis that we've put together as part of the Parks Plan memo. From there, we'll talk about some of the preliminary recommendations that we've set out in the memo, and then talk about what some of the next steps are for the process. So as Gudrun mentioned, parkland dedication allows you to expand the park system as growth comes to your town. So you're going to have 1,000 new people. You're going to need some new park space to accommodate those people. And so you get parkland through the development process. The new development will provide you with parkland or payment in lieu of parkland so that you can purchase additional lands and build your parks. So as part of review, why are we reviewing these policies? You've had policies in place. Municipalities across Ontario have had parkland dedication policies in place. So why review and update and refine these policies? I will note and I think on one of the subsequent slides we note, but we're basically working with all of the municipalities in the county except Amherstburg. They've already updated their policies, but we're working with all the other municipalities in tandem to update their policies as well. So everyone's kind of looking at this with fresh eyes at the same time. So one of the first reasons why you'd want to look at undertaking this analysis is in your Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it typically sets out some standards that you want to achieve. So you want to achieve 7 acres of parkland for every 1,000 people. That's the standard that's identified there. But if we take that, we look at your current inventory, and we look at how many people we're anticipating over the next 10, 20, 30 years, we apply that standard, are we going to be able to achieve that standard with the provisions or your current policies, or are you going to need some additional funds which would then have to be paid for through taxes? So that's always good to know from a financial standpoint. As well, as I'm sure you're all aware, Bill 23 that the province introduced did make some changes to some other revenue tools, such as development charges. And as well, I'll talk about the changes it made to the Planning Act with respect to parkland. And so what that does is it really restricts your ability to recover revenues through these tools, which then puts the onus or the burden on taxpayers. So if we can maximize the recovery of parkland dedication through these policies, then we can reduce the impact on the taxpayers for funding the growth-related needs. And as Gudrun mentioned, a parkland dedication bylaw requires a parks plan, and the parks plan memo that we've put together meets that requirement. And then a parkland dedication bylaw is required to utilize the maximum provisions of the Planning Act. So I mentioned we're working with all of the municipalities listed here: Essex, Tecumseh, Lakeshore, Leamington, Kingsville, at the same time. And I'll talk a little bit about the kind of approach to stakeholder engagement a little bit later in the presentation. So there's really two sections of the Planning Act, I guess 3 sections technically, of the Planning Act that cover parkland dedication. And so section 51.1 of the Planning Act speaks to subdivisions. So when there's subdivisions, you don't need a bylaw to impose the parkland dedication requirements. But what you can require is you can require 5% of the land for residential or institutional development, or 2% of the land for commercial or industrial development. And so you can either take the physical land and then go build a park on it, or you can take the cash in lieu or the payment in lieu of the land, so the equivalent value of the land. As well, the Planning Act does allow you to impose this alternative rate, which it's referred to. And this rate for residential development, so rather than recovering 5% of the land or the value of the land, you can get 1 hectare of land for every 600 dwelling units, or 1 hectare, the value of 1 hectare of land for every 1,000 dwelling units. Okay. With this section, when you value the land, if you're going to take the cash instead of the actual land, the value is the day before the approval of the draft plan of subdivision. Okay, so this is typically before the lots are created, before the land is serviced. It's going to have a much lower value than I'll talk about right now. So section 42 of the Planning Act then says, well, for all development and redevelopment, not just subdivisions, if you use a bylaw, so if we pass a bylaw, we can impose under this section the same requirements: 5% of the land for residential institutional, 2% for commercial industrial, either the land or the cash or this alternative rate. The big difference here is the valuation of the land occurs the day before building permit. Okay, so this is going to be serviced lots ready to build homes on. And so the value of that land is going to be much higher than the value of the land the day before the approval of the draft plan. I did mention there's a 3rd section of the Planning Act. That's actually section 53, very similar to section 51.1. It just speaks to consents instead of subdivisions. Okay. So that's the legislative framework that allows you to require the dedication or the payment in lieu. What came through Bill 23 was some reductions or some exemptions from parkland dedication. So there were a number of changes that kind of align with the changes we saw with the Development Charges Act. So there's a rate freeze. So if I proceed through my development with a site plan or zoning bylaw amendment application, my rate is frozen when I submit my application. There's exemptions for affordable, attainable, inclusionary zoning units, nonprofit housing units, and as well the additional residential units that you're allowed to construct within a single, semi, or townhouse. You get up to 2 apartments and you don't have to pay a development charge. You're also exempt from the parkland dedication as well. Further, there's a requirement to allocate any money you have sitting in a reserve fund for parkland dedication. You have to allocate that to specific projects, 60% of that money at the beginning of the year. Now, one of the more impactful changes, especially as you see higher density development, is the reduction in this alternative rate. So I mentioned instead of the 5% you can require from residential development, you can require this alternative rate, which I mentioned was 1 hectare for every 600 residential units. It used to be 1 hectare for every 300, so they've cut that in half. Similarly, for the payment in lieu, they've cut it in half as well. On top of that, they also put a cap on there and said it can't be no more than 10% of the land area if it's a smaller development, 5 hectares or less, or 15% if it's a larger development, 5 hectares or more. Lastly, they've required a parks plan to be undertaken before you can pass a parkland dedication bylaw. And then the last bullet point here speaks to something that it's not enforced yet. It's proposed in the legislation. But what it says is potentially developers will be able to incorporate encumbered lands into the lands that they dedicate. So if you require 5% of the land area so you can build a park, potentially they'll be allowed to give you encumbered lands which you won't be able to build a park on. So maybe it has some drainage issues, some natural heritage issues, maybe it's a woodlot. So potentially they will be able to give you land that you can't even build a park on. So some of these things, again, just restrict your ability to try to meet those service level targets in your Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So as part of the Parks Plan, as part of the memo, the analysis that we put together, what we've looked at is we've taken those standards, so let's say 7 acres of parkland per 1,000, for example. We've applied that to the growth forecast to 2040. So based on your development charge background study, which already had a growth forecast identified, to see how much parkland would you need at the end of the forecast period in 2040. And that's what that top right-hand box represents. The bottom section then says, okay, well, if we start with our current inventory, we look at our growth forecast and we apply our current policies or the policies we're allowed to impose under the Planning Act, where will we be in terms of comparison to our standard? And then will there be a gap? And so if there is an identified gap, that would need to be funded through other sources with taxes, for example. So I mentioned that rate freeze that was brought in from Bill 23. And so if you proceed through site plan or zoning bylaw amendment, the rate is frozen when you submit your application. To kind of manage this and to identify what that rate could be, we do recommend that an appraisal be undertaken when these applications are submitted. That way, you know the value of the land, you can apply the percentage, and the rate would be locked in as required under the Planning Act. So I mentioned for residential development, there's really the two approaches. You use the 5% or use this alternative rate. And so one of the things we've provided for in this memo in the analysis is to say, well, you have the choice of what approach to use. How do you know what one is better? And so if we work through the math, you can actually find the break-even point, which basically says that if you have a density of 12 units per acre, so a development density of 12 units per acre or more, you'll get more dedication if you use that alternative rate. If it's less than 12 units per acre, you get more if you use the 5%. Similarly, for payment in lieu, if you're going to take the cash, if the density is 20 units per acre or more, then you get more cash if you use the alternative rate. Otherwise, you'd use the 5% if it's a lower density. And we show this to provide some background on if you do want to maximize recovery of parkland dedication or payment in lieu of parkland dedication, you can set out in the bylaw and in your policies to basically take the higher of and just look at the density so that you can maximize what your recoveries are. So I talked about the Bill 23 cutting in half that alternative rate. So really just put into perspective, what does that mean for an actual apartment building in the town? So we took a sample property and we're looking at it, it's about 1.65 hectares. There's about 120 units, just rough estimation, which gives you a density of about 73 units per hectare. So under the old rules, before Bill 23, what that says is if you're going to take the cash, it's the equivalent of 0.24 hectares of land, the valuation. Since they cut it in half, you'd only be able to collect about 0.12 hectares of land valuation. If we apply a value that we've used in other communities in this area, we're looking at some community benefit charges, so looking at value of high-density lands. If we apply that value, what that means is that's about a loss of about $400,000 from what you could have collected to what you could collect now by cutting this in half. With respect to those exemptions, the way that they're removed from the calculation is if I'm going to take 5% of the value of the land, but let's say there's 100 unit subdivision and 10 of those units are exempt, well, then I can only recover 90% of that 5%. So that 5% of the land area now drops down to about 4.5%. Okay? So we just have to take them out of the calculations. I already mentioned that administrative impact of identifying that 60% of the monies to those specific projects, and the other adjustments that kind of align the changes to the Planning Act with the Development Charges Act. One thing I will note when we're looking at this analysis and we're looking at how much land do I need to accommodate the new development, parkland dedication fees are not only used for land. The legislation does say that you can use it for other purposes, improvement or repair of buildings, acquisition of machinery, etc. So although we're looking at the land as one component, you can still use those fees for other things. So if we've identified a deficit in just the land, then we're also identifying that there is no additional money available for those other matters that could be funded with parkland dedication fees. So in terms of your current policies, looking at your official plan, in terms of the actual parkland dedication, what it says is you can get, and this is kind of what we would recommend as part of the bylaws I was mentioning, whatever is greater, the difference of 5% of the land for residential developments or that alternative rate, and then for non-residential, that 2% of the land for industrial and commercial developments. If you're going to take the cash, there's a couple different approaches that you can use based on your policies. And so historically, there's a policy of using a fee per lot of $750, or you can impose that 5% or 2% of the value of the lands. And so just looking at that fee per lot for a moment, and this is something we're going to be looking at with all the municipalities in the county, is that you're allowed to impose 5% of the value of the land. So if we do the math backwards and we say, okay, well, if you're charging $750 a lot, what that's saying at 5% is the lot's worth $15,000. So obviously we know that value is a little bit low. Can't buy a lot for $15,000. So what we've done is we said, okay, well, let's take a look at MPAC values and sales prices of properties that are clearly they've been sold from a developer to a builder because they're serviced lots ready to be sold or ready to be built upon. What we've observed is about the estimated lot value is about $250,000 for a lot that's ready to be built upon. And so if we take 5% of that value, the fee could be as high as $12,500. So just putting into perspective that fee, if you do want to use a kind of per lot fee approach, rather than requiring an appraisal and getting 5% of the value of the lands, that the fee could be increased, and it's something that the municipalities in the county are all looking at jointly. So as part of that Parks Plan memo analysis, what we've done is we've taken a look at the potential needs for parkland to 2040. And the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update identified a standard of 5 acres of parkland for community parks per thousand, and I apologize for the typo on here, but 2 acres of parkland per thousand for neighborhood parks. And so if we look at those individually, the community parks, you actually are exceeding your current inventory requirements or the requirements by 2040. But if we look at the neighborhood parks, what it's saying is you'd need another 17.21 acres of parkland by the end of the forecast period. We did look at an alternative scenario in the Parks Plan memo, given that when we're identifying the need for parks, you're not just looking at an overall standard of 2 acres per thousand, you're going to look at where they're located, especially with neighborhood parks. And so the Master Plan Act talks about a 5-minute walk from residents generally to the neighborhood parks. And so as an alternative scenario, we looked at, well, what if you needed 2 acres of park per thousand for all the new development? So kind of not just worrying about your existing inventory, but all new development needs that standard. That would mean you'd need about 26.22 acres by 2040. So if we work through the analysis, we've kind of looked at the current policies set out in the OP, if we maximize the policies in the Planning Act, and then what happens when we apply that alternative residential rate. You can see that you would basically meet your needs by the end of the forecast if you're using, if you're receiving the actual physical land, either the 5% from residential and 2% from the industrial commercial. But if we look at the payment in lieu, and this is what always gets a little bit more interesting, is there's a lot more assumptions that go into this. If you're going to be purchasing actual parkland, what's the value that you're going to be purchasing the land at? And so we made some assumptions in the memo based on what we've observed in other communities. But what this says is if you were to actually just apply that per lot fee to all new residential development, you'd only get about $2.8 million. If you were to utilize that 5% and 2% rates and require appraisals and get the actual value of the land, it'd be about $31 million. Okay? And if we looked at using that alternative residential rate, you'll see it actually decreases. That's just because the forecast we have currently doesn't have a lot of high density development, has more low density development, but as your density does get higher, you do get more demand for apartments. The use of that alternative rate will be important. So just some of the general observations here is that using a combination of the 5% and 2% and the alternative rate, whichever is greater, which aligns with your official plan policies, is going to help you maximize the recovery of parkland. That historical per lot fee is low relative to what the current lot values are, and so an observation is that could be increased, which when I talk about the engagement in a moment, that's some of the feedback we're going to be seeking from the stakeholders. And then lastly, as part of the memo, we've identified some preliminary recommendations, and as well in that memo there's a draft bylaw that would be considered at a future date, which takes kind of what I discussed today, using the maximum provisions you can under the Planning Act, using that 5%, 2%, using the alternative rate where it makes sense. All of that is being identified in that draft bylaw. And so a requirement of the Planning Act before you pass a parkland dedication bylaw and as part of the Parks Plan is it says that you shall consult with the local school boards and you may consult with whoever you deem appropriate. And so based on discussions with staff and with the other municipalities, what's being proposed is a joint engagement session. That way the school boards don't have to hear me give the same presentation 6 times with slight variations. But as well, we can speak to the development community because there are a number of developers that develop in multiple communities. We can speak to them about what everyone's doing or what everyone's proposing or what we're proposing that everyone should be doing, and get feedback from everyone together. From there, and that's anticipated to occur in March, I think just once, if all the councils are okay with going forward with that approach, then we would go forward in March or definitely in Q1. From there, we take all that feedback and then put that in a staff report, and staff would come back with the feedback and a proposed draft bylaw for your consideration. So thank you very much for listening to that presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Members of council, questions or comments? I don't, is Councillor Carrick there still?
Your worship,
Councillor Burns?
I have plenty of questions.
I have a question. Sorry.
I guess at this point, you haven't consulted with the developers at all, I'm assuming. So this proposal, price of a lot in LaSalle is probably 400,000. You have it based on 250. Would that 5% be based on the $400,000 or the 250? At which point?
So through the mayor, it would be based on the value of that specific property the day before the building permit. So in our review of properties that appeared to be ready for building, the values were about 250,000. But if we are going forward with, let's say for a subdivision requiring an appraisal will be undertaken, and we would use the value of that appraisal at the time, the day before building permit.
Another follow-up, Your Worship. In the report, you say that an acre of developable land is 1.5 million. I'm not an Einstein, but that's 4 houses to an acre. So for round figures, it's $400,000. And yet you're putting industrial at 900 and institutional at 400, which I think are, I think the 1.5 million is a fair price of what land's going for. I'm not sure on the other ones, but again, that still gets me to 400. So you'd have to, what's the rationale of 250 with generating $12.5 thousand?
So through the mayor, in the appendix to the memo, there's a list of properties, and just for confidentiality purposes, had to remove the addresses, but there's a list of properties that we surveyed utilizing MPAC data. So if there's, if there are additional properties for us to consider, happy to update the analysis.
Thank you. You come up also in the report of we will need 2,400 employees roughly. I guess, I don't know where that figure came up. Is that 2,400 total, or is that 2,400 plus the current staff we have?
Through the mayor, apologies, what table would you be referring to? If it's the forecasted employees?
Yes, you have the forecast employees, forecast 1.5 million square feet of office space. I don't know where we're going to put it, but that whole section there.
So through the mayor, that's actually, if we look at the development charges background study, what we're anticipating in the town, so not just town staff, but any development, non-residential development that we're anticipating in the town, that's where we've identified, basically utilized the employees from the development charge background study forecast, as well as the incremental square feet of development.
I guess if I'm paying as a developer, I'll wear his or her hat. $750 a lot today, and you're suggesting $12,500, and I get the reasons for that. To our residents, or future residents, you're going to make a lot worth at least $500,000 with the development charge, land transfer tax. I don't know how we're ever going to build affordable housing in LaSalle. So I have I understand the need, I understand the downloading, but I guess through consultations, if I'm a developer looking at this thing and I've got 100 lots, that's 1.25 million. I don't know whether that'll be detrimental. So what has your experience in other areas? I'm sure this is not the first municipality to go through this type of an upgrade, but what have you found in other areas, and how has that been handled so it's more acceptable to our developers or to our community?
So through the mayor, you know, what we can do in the bylaws is have some transitional provisions. That fee per lot, we can phase that in over a period of time if we'd like to kind of lessen that impact. We can also take a look at any developments that have already kind of gone through the process or already down the path, down the development process, and have transitional provisions so they won't be shocked by any increase as well. So there's a number of transitional provisions we could include in a bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Carrick.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just a little bit of clarification. So is this per development, or is it overall impact on the town for the amount of acreage we have for like dedicated parkland and stuff? One question.
Sorry, through the mayor. Sorry, would you be able to clarify?
Yeah, so in the town, we just bought Front Road Development, right? We have a development down there, LaSalle Landing. So that's basically a ton of parkland. So is that part of the whole process of the town for the amount of coverage we have? Or is this just sites, or is this specific to each individual development?
So through the mayor, so the so each development would be required to provide 5% of their lands. But if you're referring to the inventory of parkland versus what we need in parkland, we've taken a look at the existing inventory based on the Parks and Rec Master Plan, the development charge background study, and worked with town staff to update that to be reflective of the amount of parkland you currently have in your inventory. And then the additional development would then drive the additional demand for the that 22 or so acres of parkland.
Okay, so as new development comes on, so I'm understanding this right, that will offset the needs we'll have. And I guess my next question, it went from 300 units to 600 units. That's less parkland available, so to speak, if you're allowing more units per hectare as opposed to 300. And I guess the overall question is, these new rules, I don't know if you can tell me exactly whatever, but we're not gaining. Are we losing, and how much are we losing? Like overall, especially when it comes to money and what we're gonna have to maybe come up with down the road as far as raising taxes. Any idea like where we're at now versus what we're dealing with in the future? Because nothing is ever even. Thank you.
So through the mayor, unfortunately, it's hard to anticipate the amount of affordable or attainable housing or nonprofit housing that will be exempt from parkland dedication fees. The alternative residential rate being cut in half it won't impact the town as much right now, but as you get more and more density and as there's more of a demand for higher density developments, then that reduction in the alternative rate will impact you into the future. Unfortunately, can't estimate what that impact is today.
Yeah, so just then sorry, Your Worship, for you, one follow-up then. We have a huge development coming, Howard Buford District Planning Area. Thousands, tens of thousands, people probably are from anywhere from a size maybe 40, 50,000 the next 20, 30 years. So I know we're putting this stuff in place now, but so what you're saying is that's gonna have to be a difference made up then because that's new coming on, right?
Yeah, so through the mayor, yeah, so as part of the development in that secondary plan area, I think, and it would depend on the details and the parameters, but more than likely you'd probably require the actual physical land as part of that secondary plan, like the development. So you'd be looking to get 5% of the land of that area to build the parks that are required. So There might not be a deficit in that area specifically, if you're able to get the land. The challenge is when you get the cash instead of the land.
Okay, so, I'm sorry. I don't mean to take up all the time, but, so as we move forward, we are protecting as much as we can protect under the provincial guidelines, right? Is that correct? Like, so if we make sure that we do all we do, and we phase in maybe the price of not 12,500 overnight, but maybe over a year or two or whatever, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure as we're moving forward, we're still providing what we need to provide to protect the environment in the sensitive areas. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, yeah, that's correct. I think through the planning policies, less so on the parkland dedication, but through your planning policies in the official plan, and the director of planning would be better suited to address that question. But you would be looking to protect those lands through those other policies.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry, if I could chime in, if that's okay, Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties, so I'm not going to turn my camera on. Just to Councillor Carrick's question. So I believe what you're referring to, Councillor Carrick, is sort of the protection of natural heritage, the protection of the natural heritage system, which is separate and apart from parkland dedication. So, you know, this proposal and this presentation doesn't preclude any natural heritage protection that we're already going to do as part of the Howard Bouffard secondary plan.
Thank you.
If that helps.
Yeah, it does help, and we're still moving parks forward too, so that's a huge help. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I do have one. How will this bylaw address those encumbered parcels of land that the developers could give to the municipality? Because I know that was one of our biggest concerns coming out of the announcements from Bill 23. Obviously, Bill 23 has been changing consistently, but that's one thing that I haven't heard any changes on, and I'm not sure how we're going to be able to address that.
So it's interesting because you know, that is the one section of the legislation besides the affordable attainable that is still not yet in force, and I was unclear why they didn't put that section into force, but that's up to the province to decide. The bylaw itself doesn't need to specifically address it because the legislation will guide what you can and can't accept for parkland dedication. So really what's happening in the legislation is it says that you can deny, if someone says, okay, we're going to give you encumbered lands as part of our 5%, you can say, no, we don't want it. What's changed is the developer can now take you to the OLT. Previously, they didn't have that power. Now they have that power. Well, potentially when that section comes into force. So they'll be able to take you to the OLT and fight it. I think over time, there might be some kind of precedent to say, well, you might have to accept woodlots and you might have to accept these certain types. But that would be handled kind of over time through cases at the tribunal. So unfortunately, I don't think the bylaw necessarily needs to address it because the legislation will kind of guide what you can and can't accept.
Thank you. I don't think I have any other questions at this time because we haven't had the chance to speak with any of the stakeholders. I think that will help guide us in that next phase of this to kind of help us understand what our community thinks of these new charges. But one thing we've always said in the town of LaSalle and we've always tried to do was growth pays for growth, and I think this is what we're trying to still do. It shouldn't be up to our current residents to have to be able to afford more taxes to pay for parkland for future residents. That was, you know, something we always tried to do, so hopefully we can continue to with this new bylaw. I don't have anything else. I don't know if administration wants anything else to add to it. So with that, there is a recommendation in front of us. It's that the report of the Director of Planning Development dated December 12, 2023 and corresponding park plan analysis and presentation provided by Watson Associates Economics Limited regarding municipal parkland dedication be received, and that Council authorizes administration to proceed with a regional public consultation session in partnership with the local area municipalities to engage the broader development community and local school boards to gather feedback related to the proposed parkland dedication bylaw being considered. All right, moved by Councillor Richo Spagnolo, support by Councillor Reno. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, we will move on to item 2, which is our post-budget deliberations report, and I will turn that over to our Director of Finance, Mr. Langlois.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So before you is a report on the post-budget deliberations. So back last month when we had the proposed budget, council asked us to look at some reductions. We came in at 6.85%, and we were asked to look at 2 different options to get it down to 5.5% rate increase and a 5% rate increase. So the report before you really does kind of speaks for itself, but I'll reiterate a couple items. You know, in the past number of years, the budget has become very lean. Anywhere, you know, where we did have, we were under budget, we've reduced the budget. A good example of that this year is, you know, we had interest rate revenue is significantly higher because of the rates that have increased recently. So we've increased that revenue. In areas where there's been expenses that are consistently under budget, we've reduced the budget. And we're at the point where we're lean. There's no other areas where we can reduce it without affecting service levels. So on page 2 of the report, there's a chart that explains all the proposed reductions, but it's important to note that, you know, there's always a consequence now because we are lean. So with these reductions, there will be a consequence, and I list 3 of them here. So 1, it could push projects into future years. It'll delay projects. It's just going to push the cost increases into future budgets. We're reducing this year. We're going to start next year's budget with this year's reductions. And 3rd, it could potentially reduce service levels. So if we go through them, the first being the in-year deferral of staffing changes. With the proposed new positions, we delay the start dates. So next year, the full year impact is just going to be a little larger. It's going to impact next year's budget. With the increase in interest revenue, you know, this year, we'd already increased it $800,000. We're increasing it another $100,000, but we all hear the talks, you know, the economy's slowing. Interest rates are expected to start being reduced. I wouldn't want to put increase revenue too much because we're just going to have to reduce it in future years if we're not reaching those targets. Reduction of the annual strategic plan contribution. This is a service level decrease. You know, we have a bunch of different strategic plan related items in there. You know, this could impact the timing of our transit study or the number of electric vehicle charging stations that we put around town. I know we put a lot in recently, so maybe we can defer some of those. Reduction of the annual asset management plan funding. You know, we talk about inflation, but the non-construction price index is significantly higher than inflation. Last year it was over 15% increase. This year it's over 6% increase. When we talk inflation, we talk CPI, but when it comes to infrastructure, the prices have went up significantly higher. So we've reduced that. You know, that'll will be, for example, pave less kilometers of roads, or we're going to delay projects. You know, service levels, the conditions of some of our assets might be a little poorer before we replace them. Then last is the reduction of the annual LaSalle Landing Master Plan contribution. So we built that up successfully over the past number of years. The reserve currently has enough funding in it to complete the next phase of the project, which consists of the skate trail. It'll cover that as well, the operating costs. But as for future phases, those will have to be delayed. You know, to get to the 5.5%, we're looking at reducing it by $100,000, so it might delay it a little bit. But if we're looking at getting to a 5% increase, we'll be reducing that by $300,000. So that will definitely delay the next phase of the project. So with that, I am available for any questions council might have.
Thank you very much. Members of council, anyone who wants to speak on this matter before Councillor Carrick?
Thanks. So I certainly appreciate the reports and all the hard work everybody does. Coming from the other side of the tracks here, my understanding is my eyes can't be bigger than my belly. All the things we're bringing in, it's just, we can't sustain 6%, 7%, 8% budgets. It's not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination. So I will be supporting 5%, nothing above 5%. If things have to be delayed a little bit or changed up a little bit, instead of a 1 year, 2 year, 3 day delay, I'm okay. We're not getting rid of it altogether. That's fine too. But at the same time, we need to slow this down. And I think 5% is still too much, but I'm willing to go at 5%. So having said that, that's where I'm going to be at. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Reno?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, first of all, Dale, for the report and for the breakdown. You know, going through there, it seems like your priorities are very similar to mine in the way that, you know, to defer staff change for 6 months or whatever amount of time seems more doable. The increase in interest revenue seems doable. But then when we get down to the end, we start talking about LaSalle Landing. And as a council, we agreed 3 years ago to a financial plan that was very detailed, and it was a huge spreadsheet. I think Joe was involved. But we agreed that we would need to put aside a little bit more each year in order to make sure that in the end we could build what we wanted to build in a timely fashion. We've already heard that things like the Benoit House are going to push our date way beyond that because of the increased expenses. We've also just been told that we're going to lose a $200,000, a $2 million building from our skate trail because of pushing things down the road. And I respect the fact that we're going to stay in budget there, but I'm just saying these are all realities that if we start taking too much money out of that plan that you created for us, we're only going to hurt ourselves. Personally, I'm happy with the things that you brought down to 5.48. You know, and it wasn't that long ago that many of us sat at AMO and we understand the funding gap, you know. So, I mean, I realize that 300,000 is going to hurt and it's going to come back to us. But I'm willing to do that this year, but I'm not willing to give up all the 300,000. So I will be supporting a 5.48 rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Desjardins.
Thought it was on. Again, Dale, and actually all of our staff, you've done an amazing job. You truly have. You have cut, chopped, whatever you want to call it. You have made this budget pretty lean, and I don't see a whole lot of other changes that we can make. I'm looking at the 5.48 myself. I think 5 is a little because however we drop it this year, it's going to bite us in the butt next year and the year after. And I don't want it to be huge going forward. I do have a question, though, about the 100,000 and 200,000 for the LaSalle Landing Master Plan. We have a tax stabilization fund. Can we use any of that to go towards LaSalle Landing?
We can. We actually, in the capital funding plan, we do have some funding already coming from the tax stabilization reserve. Now, it's important to note that the purpose of the tax stabilization reserve is to offset one-time unexpected circumstances or items. So if something, I don't know, there was a big ice storm and like a really big ice storm, we had to spend $1 million to pick up the trees and all that, that our budget's not even close to that. We would pull out of the tax stabilization reserve to offset that. We've used it recently. The garbage collection contract was, when it was double, we're phasing that in over 3 years. We're offsetting that with the tax stabilization reserve. So those are typically items that it's used for. We do have a healthy balance in the reserve right now, so we have dedicated a little bit of that funding to help with some of the capital items in our capital plan for the LaSalle Landing project.
Okay, I'd like us to use just a little bit more then of that tax stabilization if we can. I think going forward, we have to keep our heads forward with the asset management because, again, we've all talked about the increases that are out there for all pricing and what's going forward. I think that 5.48 is where I stand on this. I can't personally see cutting it down to 5.
Thank you. Councillor Riccio Spagnolo.
Thank you through you to Mr. Langwas. First off, thank you to you and Tano and your team for presenting us with two different options that council had requested. You guys did a great job on trying to cut without fully cutting several services that our town and residents do expect of us and our town. I really wanted to be at the 5% mark. However, I'm not comfortable with another $200,000. You said possibly $300,000 of cutting more of the LaSalle Landing plans, because I know that that's something our residents do want, and I know we're excited for it, the town is excited for it, and it's something that we deserve and are anticipating for it to come to fruition. So that I'm a little bit leery on. And I also don't want to cut any services that our residents expect in our town. So for myself, I am leaning towards the 5.48 tax increase. Thank you.
Councillor Burns.
Again, thanks to Dale and your team, and I understand the option, and with interest rates up the way they are, with 30% of the residents in LaSalle are seniors like myself, I don't know how we cannot say that this pandemic we are in, the cost of everything going up, is not a significant ice storm. I prefer the 5%, and in order to get there, I think we should be taking $200,000 of the stabilization fund, because that's what it was created for. I remember we created it in 1991. It was 2 mills. It was $40,000 for unexpected things that taxpayers would come up with that maybe wasn't in the budget, but it was the right thing to do. The first money we spent, believe it or not, was over here through Councillor Reno Sr. to build a sidewalk, because we hadn't had it from the old age home or senior home to Front Road on Orford. It made sense to spend that $10,000 then. It makes sense to do what we're going to do now, because seniors are probably the most impacted. I mean, if you worked at Chrysler and retired 25 years ago, your pension is exactly the same, except a few $50 here and there. And if you're 85 living in a home with one income only, it is very difficult. We need to consider those. Then we have the opposite end of the spectrum. People are working and money is not an object. They can easily absorb A and B, but if we're going to do something here, I think it's the right thing to take the $200,000 one-time charge and get to 5% and show that we feel the pain that some of our residents are feeling, whether they're seniors, a single parent, trying to stay in their home and make bills, and we hear it every day on the radio. More and more are going to where? They're going to the Mission to get food, or the food banks. They have to choose some people in our community. I would not like to think that they have to make those difficult decisions. This is one where, if we're going to have compassion, I think we need to do it now. And I know pushing it down the road means next year we're not going to be able to do it, but I would be happy at doing it at 5%, and that's where I stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Militia?
Perhaps I can just put a little bit of context with respect to the reductions, the last 3 reductions that are on schedule, or sorry, on page 2 of the report. And I can understand where council is trying to encourage the use of the tax stabilization fund. But in the context of municipal finance and planning, how we devise the funding mechanism for our asset management plan, as well as the LaSalle landings, is that, if I can equate it to a household, is that we would put away a little bit of money each year and add to that every year, developing a pot of money that we would then use to build something or operate something. That's really the concept that we're under. So if we were to replace any one of those 3 last allocations with an allocation from the tax stabilization fund, realistically, it does nothing to the actual budget. the monies that are set aside as part of the budget, the 300,000 for the asset management plan, the phase 1 of the LaSalle Landing contribution of $100,000 and the phase 2 amount of $200,000, all that money is really going towards putting that money aside to be used in the future. And so by moving those funds out of the budget, we are limiting what we can do in the future, and that's what we've indicated in the report. But a substitution of the tax stabilization funding on a one-time basis doesn't really do anything from that perspective, because the next year we're going to have to recoup that. And I think Mr. Langlois referred to, we'll have to start the year with putting those funds into the budget on top of what we had already decided. Now, that's based on a plan where we continue to go with the original program. If council at some point says to administration, what we've committed to and are looking at the LaSalle Landing site, for example, that is where we're going to stop for now, and we're just going to operate what we have, then really at that point, we just have to ensure that we have enough money for operations, but we're not putting that money aside to do anything more. And so things like, we've talked about, whatever's not in the program. So currently, right now, we have the skate trail that's in the program, as well as what's been built to date. If we move off of this, we're going to gear down, and we'll have to relook at what comes next, and it will take substantially longer time, and we'll have to come back to council on those items and say, would you like to add in amenity A or B or C, and here is the impact. And so, to Councillor Carrick's original point, we'll be slowing things down at the waterfront by taking these allocations out of the budget. If that's what council's will is, that we're certainly able to do that. The asset management one is a little more difficult because those costs are coming further afield. And so, the money that we have put aside, for example, over the last decade, is the pot of money we now have available to do Malden Road. And so that is kind of that swing of putting money aside annually so that we can have a pot of money available to do a large project for. So that, I guess that's the best example I can use. And so this will have an impact in terms of how we progress on the LaSalle landings, and we've identified that within the report. But I don't believe that substituting an allocation from the tax stabilization would work to achieve what council's objective is in this case.
Thank you. Anything else to add? Okay. I think I want to kind of give my outlook on this budget and what we've been trying to do since the first budget proposal was sent to us at the end of last year. And we've allowed the public to come and consult, to be part of the open house. By us also extending it to the new year, it gives our residents a chance again to look at the budget, to look at the documents, and to come back to us with their thoughts and opinions. And everyone realizes it's a hard year. None of us are not feeling the effects of the grocery bills, the hydro bills, and everything else. So we're all affected by it. But I think what we all really need to look at is our residents have been very clear about a few things. They're extremely happy with the level of service in the town of LaSalle. They are very concerned with the future infrastructure of our municipality. They want to make sure that we have the funds available to repair and replace as needed. And if we don't continue to focus on that, we won't be in that position. We do have a hefty reserve for that at this point. I believe our asset reserve is something, I want to say 80%. I don't know if I'm accurate, 80% on core assets. So that is great, but it's not enough. It's not where we need to be. And when we talk about LaSalle Landing, we hear from our residents, and I have since I got on council in 2010, is that we've forgotten about Front Road. We finally have invested in Front Road, and if we stop now, we're going to put this on pause, and who knows when we'll be able to start again, because every year it's going to continue to cost us more and more to do the next project. we want to hopefully eventually move that LaSalle Strawberry Festival back to Front Road. Well, if we take this funding away, that will be put on hold because that area will not be completed. We've talked about safety, and if we take the funds away, we will not be able to have the funds to put in the new street light and street right there at that event center. So we have to really look at how this is impacting us. And one thing we did at this budget, and we really, really tried to put out to the community, was the actual cost of the increase of this budget. And I don't want to talk about percentages because I find it extremely confusing to our residents because they truly don't know how that affects them. So when we sit here and we talk about 5.48 and 5%, to them, they have no idea what that actually means. So I want to look at exactly what that means to our residents. If we were to reduce it from the current 6.85%, which was $193.42 per year for an average home, and I know that's a confusing term for residents, but that's actually what they're paying their taxes on, $193.42 is what we were at. If we reduce it to 5.48%, it's $154.47 per year on an average home. We're sitting here discussing 5.48% or 5%, which is a difference of $13.43 per year for an average homeowner, or 26 cents a week. Is that 26 cents? I know we want to help our residents out, but we have to look at the future. We have to look at the fact that next year, if we don't do this now, we are pushing it to next year when things are going to cost us more money. That 26 cents is no longer 26 cents. Maybe it's 36 cents. Maybe it's 56 cents. I'm not sure. But the fact is we can't keep pushing it down the road. We've learned from our mistakes in the past. Every time we do that, it comes back to bite us in the butt and we pay more. And our residents end up paying more. So I look at this. There are a few things I'm just not willing to remove. Infrastructure is extremely important. We've heard this over and over again from our residents. I think we have to continue to invest in our asset management, and I think we need to continue to invest in our front road area of the town of LaSalle because that's what our residents keep telling us. So I look at 5.71%, which was a difference of, what was it, 39 cents a week is what I had. I'm not sure if we talk real numbers, if our residents would look at us and say we're making a mistake by going to that percentage, because at the end of the day, that's not a lot of money per person, but it is going to be a huge effect to the town of LaSalle if we take this big hit. I look at it, I've struggled with this because I've heard from residents, but I'll be honest with you, I've heard less from them this year than I have in the last 5 years. It's crazy to think that way, but they all understand the pressures that we're facing. Municipalities no different than any home in the town of LaSalle. We have the same amount of pressure. And when I look at what the actual cost is to a homeowner, I think we need to look at the actual numbers before we make this decision, not the percentages, because at the end of the day, that's not, our residents don't understand how that's personally affecting them. So I will not vote for a 5% only because I think it's really going to hurt the municipality. So with that, I know I threw a lot of numbers out there, but I really want, whatever we decide on this evening, I want the focus to be on what the actual impact is on the average homeowner so that they can go away and understand this year it's going to cost me this much more. So that's all I've got. I will leave it to council for a, I guess, recommendation or, go ahead, Councilor Reno.
I'll make a motion that we approve the reductions to bring us down to a 5.48 increase.
Councilor Charlie, support? Okay, so just so I'm understanding, maybe administration can fill us in by us reducing it to the 5.48%, which is $154.47 per year for the average homeowner. We aren't actually giving you direction on what items to reduce, because I don't think that's what we should be doing. Would you then go back and look at that number and decide what areas to remove it from? Or are you looking at 5.48% removes the asset management funding, the strategic plan? Is that specifically what you're going to do, is how it's written?
That's correct.
Okay.
That is the motion I'm making.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. So your motion is to reduce it to 5.48%. which would be the increase of $154.47 per average home in the town of LaSalle. That's moved and supported, and I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. We will move on to our consent agenda. Oh, did we say something? Councillor Carrick, did you have something? I think you're on mute. You're still on mute. I can't hear anything.
No, I missed my opportunity to say something. Thank you.
Okay, so consent agenda, there's 4 items. Are there any of these 4 items that you would like to remove or discuss? Councillor Reno?
Just I'd like to discuss the council requests. I did read through them and I saw that request that I'd made back in December about the possibility of examining a bylaw that may be able to prevent deliveries under the cover of night. I see a note in there that it is not illegal. It is not legally possible. So if that is the fact, I would like that removed from the request.
Okay, do you need a motion to remove that, or can we just remove it? Let's remove it, perfect. Anything else on items 1 through 4 in the consent agenda? There being none, if we can get a motion to receive those items. Councillor Riccio Spagnolo, support Deputy Mayor Acapata, all in favor? And that carries. Committee matters, we have just the Essex County Council highlights for December 6th, 2023. And if we can get a motion to receive those. Councillor Reno, support. Councillor Burns, all in favor? That carries. Any questions or statements by council members? No. Notices of motion? Earlier this evening, we did have a closed session. Council met in closed session for the purposes of the CAO's performance evaluation. And with that, we have our bylaws. And we have a recommendation that the following bylaws be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed. And that's bylaw 8846, 8847, 8848, 8849, 8850, and 8851. Moved by Councillor Desjardins, support by Councillor Carrick. All in favor? And that carries. And with that, we have our confirmatory. On that one, okay. So, yes, Deputy Mayor Capata. All in favor? We're good on that. Okay. Okay. Confirmatory bylaw 8852 be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed. Councillor Reno, Deputy Mayor Capata, all in favor? And that carries as well. There is a schedule of meetings. Thank you for joining us in person and online. Have a good night.